Welcome to another episode of the Vinimark Podcast. In this series, we engage in conversations along the rough edges of wine commerce, science, cellar mastery, marketing, and the rising trends amidst the industry's more adventurous pioneers. Today, we want to chat about the effects of drought, both in the vineyards and also in the glass. Does drought have a taste? Now, whether one is a wine drinker or not, most of us understand that when it comes to farming, drought is a bad thing. But wine lovers will also know that vines are at their best in marginal environments where everyday life for the plant can be a struggle. And I guess the point is seldom more obvious than when we look at many of South Africa's most exciting wines that have come out of very harsh and dry environments. It's fairly indisputable that 2015 through to 2017 were some of the driest years on record in the Western Cape. But 2015 and 2017 were also touted as two of the most exciting vintages of the decade. So, to try and unwrap these conundrums, I'm chatting to the enigmatic Callie Louw, the custodian, farmer, and winemaker at the Swartland estate of Porseleinberg. In 2020, the Porseleinberg Syrah 2018 was only the second red wine from South Africa ever to achieve a perfect score in the Tim Atkin report. And so, in case it needed to be said, that's a pretty good, big deal. Now, Callie, thank you so much for taking time to chat to us today. So, before we get into the topic of drought and its effects, I wanted to ask you about your take on the 100-point rating, because when Greg Sherwood was writing about some of your vintages between 2010 and 2016, his take was that your wines should be cellared for at least 5 years before drinking. He even said 8 years in some cases. But Tim went and gave you 100 points just 2 years after the release. Now, do you feel like Tim was looking into the future, or do you feel that the way you make wine has changed more recently?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to answer. I sort of give myself off as a farmer rather than a winemaker. So we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how to make a wine, how to make it better, how to make it suit the vintage, whatever. We basically, because I work with a lot of grapes, I need to move a lot of grapes to the other two wineries. We basically just throw grapes in tanks, and what comes out comes out. What we're trying to portray though is the vintage and the place rather than fancy winemaking techniques. So yeah, I think more than anything else, Tim gave Porseleinberg the farmer 100 points rather than the effort that's put into the cellar.
Yes, I mean, you've often been quoted as saying that your wine is really just a sign of how well you farmed, which I've always found fascinating. But so, I mean, am I correct in understanding from what you said that you don't really make changes from year to year? You might not, you won't go get around to thinking to yourself, look, this vintage was particularly dry, so I'm going to work less with it. Or, I mean, do you have those thought
No, no.
processes?
Every year is exactly the same since the first vintage, 2010. Syrah is a grape that is quite, I suppose, it's easy to work with in the winery. And I wanted to do something that's very much traditional, the old way. So it's everything goes into the tank. The stem, the skins, everything. We don't over salt and overwork the grapes. We pick the grapes that look the best and taste the best, and that's all transferred into tank. And this site produces grapes with amazing concentration. So we have the Porseleinberg wine is always known for the tannic one in any tasting. We have a lot of structure. And that also carries the wine in its use and into aging very nicely in the bottle. So hopefully we haven't got anything to 15 years old yet. The 2010 is starting to drink really nicely now, and that's 11 years down the line. So yeah, it seems as if the initial plan to be very hands off and just be quite old school and respect the site and respect the grapes is working.
Yeah, can I pick up on what you were saying about concentration? Because I mean, winemakers often talk about how droughts affect the quality of a wine, and I've heard it mentioned plenty of times that in drought years you get a much higher concentration in the wine. But it feels like, isn't that a good thing?
Yes and no. I'm sort of opposed to the notion of vines being anorexic. I don't think anything that struggles that much can produce anything quality. Balance is a bit of a abused thing in wine terms, but it is at the end of the day something that to me is anything, any plant, any living thing needs to live in in some sort of happy state. If things aren't going well, you make stupid decisions, or you drop your leaves, or So our main aim is to ripen the grapes that are on the vines to the best, to the best phenolic or whatever sugar potential. And you need leaves, and you need an active root system. So those are the things that I tend to farm with. And being more on the farm side, I'm trying to ripen a bit more grapes than a lot of the smaller guys that need 1 and 2 tons. I need a lot more grapes. I'm feeding a few bigger lines. But the very first of the drought years, the winter of 15 was particularly bad. That was on Porseleinberg, 221 mils. That was half the rain that we had the previous year, and we didn't have any spring, so it went from a small winter basically into summer, and the yields went down to between 1 and 3 tons per hectare. And I mean, that's like, farming wise, that's suicide. And the thing's also got to be sustainable in an economic sense as well. It's nice to talk tall tales about small crops, but if it doesn't pay the bills at the end of the day, then you should rethink that notion. Yeah, so 16 sort of set us up for the 3 years. 2017, the winter of 16 was a bit less so. 17 was actually, I think, as you said earlier, a really nice year. We didn't have quite as much rain, basically 2/3. So 16, it was a half of the average. 17 was 2/3 of the average, and then the 18 vintage we went down again to half, about 224, and then 19 we had a little break where it went back up to about 415, and then 20 was down to 355 again, and this year just touched on 400. So my 6-year average, which should be 450, is down to 350. So we basically we're 100 mil short every year for the last 6 years. So that's significant. I mean, that's 1.5 vintages worth of rain that we've not had. So and the thing with any long-term plantings, orchards and things like that, there is a bit of a build-up. So we need a good few years before we get back to even again, and plants and things just getting back to a stress-free productive cycle.
And you were talking about sort of levels of financial sustainability, and obviously it's going to differ quite a bit from operation to operation. But when you're farming in the Swartland, what sort of yield would you think, in ballpark terms, is sustainable? And you were saying 1 or 2 tons. It might sound grand, and it might sound like it makes a fancy wine, but it's very difficult to pay your bills on those sorts of yields. What do you think farmers in the Swartland should be trying to achieve with Syrah specifically?
Yeah, I think most places, the soils, obviously on the Porseleinberg, it's we have a bit of irrigation, because without irrigation on this farm, nothing will grow. It's just that extreme. I farm another farm on similar soils, just a bit more weathered on the Riebeek Mountain, and they will produce double the amount of grapes. But the Paraberg, my neighbor, they predominantly dry land, and so I think 5 to 7 tons on a dryland farm. And if you're doing a good job of the farming, and it's planted with the proper material, and you put a bit of effort in, 5 to 7 tons, you should be getting 10,000 rand a ton, hopefully. I think the good sites, most of those sites are guys being paid proper money, because a lot of there's still quite a lot of people farming a lot less tons, and the price is still down, especially guys delivering to here and there to a co-op and things. And obviously that's a long-term relationship that I don't really know all the ins and outs. But I think between 5 and 7 tons selling to a reasonable customer, you should be able to keep your boat afloat.
I suppose that is a key little throwaway line, selling your grapes to a reasonable customer. But you mentioned the concept of dryland farming. Can you just expand a little bit on that for folk who may not fully understand the term?
Yeah, well, obviously, dryland farming is in the name, so it's without any additional water. You're 100% dependent on rainfall. And I think if you want to be a dryland farmer, I've read a lot of articles about dryland farming, and dryland farming is actually, in a sense, quite a privilege if you're farming in an area with soil strong enough and obviously natural rainfall high enough for you to realize the crop of quality and of quantity. It makes life a bit easier. Just in terms of the Porseleinberg, we are working towards dryland farming. I think if you're in a site where those things aren't, really working, then you can look at the soil, what we are doing, and I think that's what a lot of dryland farmers as well are starting to look at soils. We all sort of look at the wine in the glass and forget about all the 11 months it took to get that wine in the glass. And there's a lot of really cool things that a lot of us are starting to do properly now, is cover cropping, looking more at soil health, soil life, diversity of the cover crops, less use of roundups and chemical fertilizers. Yeah, just trying to grow something that's getting a lot more traction is the growing of your soil's carbon content. And a lot of people look at humus and think, yeah, no, they've got a pile of humus. They've got 6 and 7 and 8% of humus, but carbon, I think, is about 1.7. 1% of carbon is 1.7% of humus. So the carbon content isn't really that high, although the humus looks high. And with our old soil, the carbon is really depleted. It's, carbon breaks down in sun and when it gets cold and a whole lot of stuff like that. So things like no-till or minimum till, just letting a soil develop instead of turning it a lot. And I mean, the mechanical action is also quite aggressive on carbon. And farming soils with a bit more cover instead of the old way of, normally it looks like a desert and then you just have these green lines of vines. So a bit more cover on the soil, a bit more retaining moisture. Yeah, and I think the reality with what's going on globally and getting warmer and looking after your soil is the only thing we can do to keep this thing growing sustainably and get a good few more years out of it before the shit hits the fan. That's how I would on this side get towards dryland farming is trying to improve my soil. Not improve it like in just slowly building it naturally. You can truck in cubes and cubes of compost, but I think that's sort of against the grain of the holistic and sustainable thing. You need to produce something on your farm and keep it here and work with what you've got.
Absolutely. I mean, that feels like that's one of the core sentiments behind dryland farming, is to be able to produce a sustainable crop using the climate that you've been given. And as you say, it's a privilege to be in a slightly cushier environment, but the Swartland is not always as gentle as you'd like it to be. Just specifically with regards to sort of sugar levels and titratable acids and tannins in a wine, what I'm wanting to do is really link the effects of drought in the vineyards to the flavors of wine in a glass. And you said we often look at a glass and enjoy the wine, but forget about the 11 months that came before it. So I'm wanting to try and link those two. Can you tell us, with regards to ripening and development of fruit on the vines, why is carbon so central? Obviously, it's as a compound, it's central to all organic chemistry, but what role does it play in the development and ripening of fruit on the vines?
Well, carbon is basically the reserve tank in terms of moisture. I've been to a few lectures and things, and I think they sort of worked out if you can raise the real carbon in your soil with 1%, you effectively double the water holding capacity of the soil. So that's substantial. And I think, as I said earlier about things being in balance, so if there's a reserve tank that is nice and it's not just 60 k's and then you empty it. It's 500 k's, and that's what happens in December, January, especially in the Swartland and in South Africa or in the Western Cape. We have heat waves and we have weather patterns that can really, because at that stage the vine is it's in the last 100 meters and it's almost the most important 100 meters. Because if there's nothing in the reserve and we get those heat waves, the first thing the plant wants to do is drop its crop, and it just goes into a complete state of stress. The grapes don't develop anymore naturally. So you'll have an increase in acid and you'll have an increase in sugar, but that's because of desiccation rather than a bunch of grapes really ripening because of photosynthesis and because of the plant doing what it should be doing. So to me, I don't care too much and look too much at acid levels and things like that. I want to try and keep my leaves as green and as long on the vine as possible. Most of my vineyards are still pretty green, and so they're slowly shutting down, but at least they're still being active. So I think, the carbon thing is all moisture, and it's just being there to carry the crop through, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. So it seems like that is one of the most important factors that a farmer would want to look at in protecting against the effects of drought. As a farmer, currently at least, you've pretty much staked the Porseleinberg claim on Shiraz. But there seems to be a lot of excitement over cultivars from other parts of the world, like Spain and Portugal. I know Tim Atkin is super excited about Grenache. I wondered, in your opinion, what are the cultivars that you're seeing planted around you that make you excited for the future of South African wine?
Grenache is definitely, I think, of all the mainstream varieties. There's a pile of very weird things from Greece, Acertico, and how the market will react to those. Because the wine market is a difficult thing, eh? It's not like a pair of jeans that changes overnight. It takes a hell of a long time. We're still trying to convince Europe that South African wines are worth drinking, and that's proving harder and harder to do. But there are a lot of them, and as I said earlier, being sustainable, it has to make sustainable money sense as well, and that doesn't help a lot. We can farm a lot of varieties that are super drought resistant, and but if they're just going to stay in the cellar, it's not going to make a hell of a lot of sense. So I think it's a long path, but what we've got currently, Grenache is definitely one that can grow. It can produce. Analytically, it's not always. People are still a bit scared of low acid and high pH wines. I think it's something that we need to learn to work with because, at the end of the day, also adding a pile of tartaric acid or trying to change the thing is also going to take away from where it's at and rob it of its identity. So I think low acid and high pH wines it's just something I've worked with a few things in Stellenbosch and there around where things are analytically sound, but not in a lot of other places in South Africa do we really make analytically sound wines. There are a few cooler places, but especially in like the warmer areas, I think it's something that we just need to adapt to. Most of the southern French varieties are grown in similar conditions, similar soils. For me, what we've planted here, I'm just going to try and make it better for them, because it's grapes that we want and it's wines that we want to make. So I'm not necessarily hunting something that's going to be able to do with less water in 100 years' time. I'm going to sort of try and work with what we've got and try and make small changes in here and there to try and make that better.
I mean, I think your point about the way the market responds is crucial in making any of these decisions. But one thing that's always fascinated me about a lot of producers in the Swartland is that they seem to be quite dismissive of a grape like Cabernet Sauvignon, and yet studies show again and again that Cabernet Sauvignon is incredibly drought resistant, in some cases more drought resistant than Syrah. And I think an argument can be made that it's a fairly marketable grape. So why do you think that Swartland as an area has shunned Cabernet Sauvignon by and large?
I think it's just the growing conditions. Cab likes cooler. Cabs always do, in my eyes, do better where it's slightly cooler. A longer ripening season. The Swartland, it's quick. I mean, we are done harvesting in normal years, middle of February. So the time on the vine is that's why we do better with things that don't have big green molecules like methoxypyrazines and things like that that get enough time on the vine and have enough sunlight for that to develop into something that becomes delicious in a glass one day. I don't think I don't think we completely dismissive as it shouldn't grow here. I'm sure there are a few cabs and merlots and Bordeaux varieties that become a nice red wine at the end of the day, but it's not necessarily the best red wine that can come from the Swartland. The reason we went for the stuff that we decided to go with is just because we think those are the wines that will talk most about the place, about where they're from, and will be the best. Yeah, that's the grapes that will portray the Swartland the best, I think. And in most places where the way yeah, I mean, if you look at Bordeaux and those places, and it's cool. Those things are next to the river. They yeah, I've never really seen. I'm sure the cabs are super drought resistant, and rootstocks also play a hell of a big role in drought resistance. But yeah, most places where those border varieties do well, I think it's almost more continental and yeah, long cool days. It's like yeah. Anyway, don't know enough about cab. I like to drink it, but I haven't worked with it.
I was thinking more of areas like Navarra in Spain, where Cabernet Sauvignon is on the up, also very dry and
Okay.
continental, and also even high up in Napa, kind of your Mount Vida and Howell Mountain areas where
Yeah.
it's pretty warm, but Cabernet seems to be doing well. So it always just fascinates me watching other areas of the world. I think about Spain, um, and seeing how Tempranillo is grown in conditions very similar, kind of 200 to 300 mils per year, warm, dry climate or hot, dry climate. And it
Yeah.
makes me wonder if we aren't missing a trick here. But as you say, it comes down to getting the market to engage with those grapes.
Yep.
So, as I was saying, moving out of the vineyards a little bit, I just wanted to get your thoughts on water and sustainability in the cellar, because obviously, as you've mentioned, the Swartland is an incredibly dry part of the world, and we're often doing everything we can to save water. We're improving soil. We want to work towards a position where the farming operation, is sustainable without irrigation. But then reading a piece by Californian winemaker Alison Crowe, she was quoted as saying that for every 1 liter of wine produced, there can be as many as 4 liters of water used in the cleaning and sterilization of the cellar. Now, is this something that you feel is accurate? Do you use a lot of water in the cellar?
Okay, so that's about 2,400 liters per ton. If it's just, yeah, that's on the high side, eh? That is definitely on the high side. I think the best seller in South Africa is currently about 550 liters a ton. But I think a good ballpark would probably be like 1,200, so about 2 liters, um, 2 liters per liter. But yeah, I mean, it's good that we focus on the cellar because there's a hell of a lot more water being used in the vineyard. Eh? I mean, if you just like simple sums, no, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I mean, if they wanna fight with water use and wine, and then they must think about the fruit that they eat. Most orchards use between 6 and 10,000 cubes. That's 6 to 10 million liters of water per hectare. And yeah, it's a very simple sum to make to find out how much water went into an apple or an orange or a bunch of grapes. And I promise you, it's gonna be it's scary. It's not a liter or two or three; it's tens of liters.
So it's fair to say that the cellar usage is still insignificant when compared to.
Yeah, it's still properly insignificant, and a lot of people. I mean, we've got fancy things now. We've got little water guns and squeegees, and yeah, I mean, water is in the cellar. I mean, obviously, all of us try and do as little as we can, but yeah, I think if we can farm the grapes with less water, then we're winning a hell of a lot more than what we are trying to save in a cellar.
And then just asking you to sort of cast your mind forward a little bit. And I know that you're very focused in what you're doing right in front of you, but given that we're having these conversations about climate change, given that places like Bordeaux are making changes to include new grape varieties in their official AOC regulations, and given that even you've mentioned that rainfall is down and has been down for a while, do you feel like that there's going to be a shift into new regions coming to the fore where perhaps previously they were not seen as premium, but as things get drier and droughts become more frequent, there are some regions that may actually improve the quality of their wine?
Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, this whole global warming thing is still relatively new in worldly context. Apparently, the globe goes through a heat phase and a cold phase, and we're back into a cold phase. So maybe 10 years from now, we're all back to normal, and you never know. But obviously, the signs, the CO2 production is not looking too favorable. But yeah, I mean, the bubblies coming out of the EU, I mean, out of UK is already a sign of that. I mean, there's some delicious wine coming out of a country that could hardly ripen wheat, and so yeah, things like that are definitely happening, eh?
And and just in parting, you've often been described as someone who makes Cornat from the Cape, uh, and uh, and obviously you reference this a lot in your wine style. So just as a parting shot, can you uh, let me know some of the winemakers and wines around the world that continue to inspire you as you continue to release vintages of Porseleinberg?
Yeah, I just like wine, eh? From fortified to champagne to yeah, anything. If it's good, I'll try and find out what happened to it. I don't have a like. Obviously, I really enjoy drinking your own wines because it's a bit of a see how things are happening there. And there's a few guys that I try and get a bottle of every year and see how they're going. But yeah, wine is just such a fascinating drink for me. I can't single out particular ones. Yeah, and to be quite honest, I have a lot of wine geek friends that supply me with stuff. So it's not a constant search for me. I just like to spend time with quality in my glass.
That's completely fair enough. And Callie, I just wanted to thank you so much for giving time and being willing to chat to us today. As I say, I know you guys are really busy. I hope you get to take a rest at some stage once all your cover crops have been sown.
Yeah.
And thank you again.
We've reached the end of another episode of the Vinimark Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to the channel so that you can join us for more conversations around wine commerce, wine science, cellar mastery, marketing, and the rising trends amidst the industry's more adventurous pioneers.